Hello everyone, I hope all is well for you today. In this video, I wanted to discuss the problem with gameplay in Star Citizen and why it creates extreme repetition and lack of depth, as well as causes issues for long-term progress and value, as there really isn't any. I'm a huge advocate of games having rewarding gameplay that provides something for the player, and I think Star Citizen has a long ways to go before we get that type of gameplay. So, without further ado, let's talk about some Star Citizen. Now, quick disclaimer, this video is not a simple hate video on CIG or Star Citizen. I'm going to be trying my best to offer some feedback for some of the critical cracks in the foundation of the current gameplay we have. The reason I decided to make this video was going and hopping on Star Citizen every couple of nights, every night or so, getting an hour or two in. It really begs the question, what am I actually doing here outside of just doing it to do it? And you know what? There is a lot in Star Citizen right now that can create enjoyment. It's extremely immersive. The things you can do, you just simply can't do in other games. But the current gameplay, the things that we actually go out and do, and the things we actually work for, are either lackluster or not there at all. So today we're mainly going to be talking about that, and simply we're going to start this off with what is Star Citizen. In my own words, it is a sandbox, a limited sandbox, that offers very few missions that are isolated from the world of Star Citizen. As much as I love the sandbox and limitless feeling that this world attempts to offer, there isn't enough there to retain players for very long. Right now, we're going to be focusing on the mission part of the gameplay, but we will still talk about sandbox gameplay more specifically later. So the missions we do have in the game can be fun, but provide very little to the player as a reward outside of money and reputation bonuses that don't really offer much. Now, I will say this, as AI and server FPS improve, missions have been far more immersive and enjoyable than they previously were. I think once they start to offer different AI types, weapons, gadgets, PvE gameplay could be a lot more fun, and just generally all career paths. Though that doesn't separate the fact that these missions are very isolated amongst the world of Star Citizen, nor do many of them offer much incentive for teaming up or group play. Let me explain what I mean though when I say that these missions feel isolated. Right now, contracts are going to pop up in the contract manager with a basic description of what you will be doing and usually where these missions are. This is the only way currently to get contracts in the game. Once you select that contract, you'll be sent to a specific location to complete said objective, and you'll be rewarded with some AUEC as well as a tiny bit of reputation for said faction or company. For this example, I'm going to be using a mercenary contract to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Let's say the mission is finding a specific faction leader from Xenothreat and hunting them down at some sort of outpost. The outline for the contract is simple, but the potential for gameplay is decently large. Assuming there aren't too many bugs, you make your way to the designated outpost for the mission and you land nearby. You get out with any weapons and armor you brought and you head to the outpost on foot. You fight your way through the outpost using guns and grenades, and you manage to clear out all enemies, and your target is now dead. So, what's next? Well, not really anything. You're going to get paid for your work and earn a little bit of reputation. But once the objective is complete, you are now no longer tasked with anything. At this point, you can loot and explore the area you are in, but that's mostly it. This is typically how a lot of missions go, and that's totally okay. But if you're looking for any missions that offer you a unique reward or more depth, you're a bit out of luck right now. And this is where we get into that isolated factor just a tiny bit more. Now, of course, this mission is nice because you're getting paid, you get a little bit of gameplay, you have a little bit of fun, especially if the server FPS is decent and the performance is nice. But after that mission ends, it's like it never really happened. The only remnants of that mission are the dead bodies on the floor and the loot that you can take with you. But besides that, the mission giver that gave you that mission is not going to really contact you about the impact you made for them. And the Xenothreat is not going to have really any response towards what you just did to their gang. It's a weird feeling knowing that you just did something that seemingly would be impactful for both factions in this situation, but the moment it's over, it doesn't feel like anything really changed. Not only that, but there doesn't really seem to be a ton of depth in that mission. Yes, when you get to the outpost, the gameplay can be decent, but there's a ton of opportunity to add different small factors that would create a just generally more immersive experience. And that's what we're about to talk about a little bit more. So let's go back to that mission and see if we can not only add a bit more depth and immersion to the mission, as well as a little bit more value behind the rewards. Bringing it back to when you first select the contract. What if there is a disclaimer letting you know that there are two Drake Buccaneers parked outside the outpost or somewhere near the outpost? This by itself gives the player more reasons to consider their choices. Sure, if you have a good fighter ship, you can go in loud and attract the attention of the Buccaneers. Pilots will hop in, try and take you down, and you shoot them out of the sky. But what if you aren't nearly as equipped for dogfighting? You could try to take a stealthier approach, landing a distance out and going on foot to take out the pilots before they can access the Buccaneers. And imagine the mission giver mentions how starting this mission could create unknown effects from the enemy faction, meaning this faction might send out bounty hunters for you or call in a Cutlass Block to drop in some ground reinforcements. This could turn this mission that was originally a simple assassination all the way to a defensive mission that also has potential to give you gameplay long after the initial objective was completed. As a reward for doing this mission, this faction could grant you special armors and weapons that are themed around this faction that you will slowly earn for working for them. Now, I want to take a pause for 2 seconds and mention that these rewards are still very basic for what Star Citizen could offer. Of course, some special themed armor and weapons is cool, and money is nice, but besides ships, there still isn't many places to put that money. In the future, long term rewards like blueprints, crafting materials, specialized armors, and anything related to base building will offer more value for your long term progression than what we currently have. Not only this, but guild progression will create long term goals for players. Now, this is 1.0 stuff, and we're going to talk about this in just a second. But it's worth noting that this is a little bit further out now due to this playability initiative that Star Citizen currently has right now. So, for the next year or even more, whilst we don't really have much to put our resources and time into, how can Star Citizen offer us a little bit more depth and value to what we do without having some of these, like blueprints, crafting, and base building? And we'll talk about it, of course, in a little bit. But for now, we're going to stick with the idea that this mission could give you just some cool themed armors and weapons, themed to match the mission giver who assigned that mission. Now, of course, there are different career paths and mission types for each of these all throughout Star Citizen, but the point still stands. There needs to be less vertical slice type of missions. The actions you take in this world should not only have consequences and effects on your future gameplay, but it should also reward you for your time with things that will actually provide a long term value, not just money. For these reasons, the missions we offer suffer from isolation. Like I said, they almost feel like a vertical slice bit of content, rather than feeling a bit more expansive, having some more depth, just a few more variables like the Drake Buccaneer example we had earlier, and feeling like they have any cause and effect on your future gameplay in Star Citizen. This is my biggest issue with Star Citizen in current day. Now, of course, we know about the 1.0 plans, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We also have the narrative content that they've been pushing as of late, like right now. And we're going to talk about that as well as Sandbox gameplay, where you can team up with friends and do things that might not have much meaning to them, but could be a decent bit of fun. We'll talk about that as well. But if you are a player that wants to hop on Star Citizen and work towards something outside of ships, you are completely out of luck. The only thing you are really rewarded with for any of the contracts and missions that is offered in this game is money and very, very useless reputation, unfortunately. So at the end of the day, if you enjoy the experience, if you hate the missions you're doing, if you think they're tedious, if you think it's the most fun and enjoyable aspect of gaming as a whole, you are still left with practically nothing outside of money. And yes, if you want to enjoy these missions just to simply enjoy them and don't mind not progressing towards anything in the long term, then all the power to you. But if you're like me, and I assume a lot of players, and want to do these missions and enjoy them, but also feel like you're pushing and making progress towards some sort of goal, you are out of luck. And that is one of the biggest frustrations that we have currently in Star Citizen. Now, this brings us to the 1.0 talk again. The biggest reason I wanted to make this video now is due to CIG's plans for 2025. I'm all on board for getting this game in a more playable state, better performance, just generally adding quality of life to what we currently have. But we also know that in order to create that 1.0 experience, CIG is going to need to add plenty of features that we probably won't have for a decent bit of time. Things like base building, crafting, blueprints, and player to player trading. Many of these features are going to provide more opportunity for CIG to add value and reward players doing missions for guilds. But if we don't get these features, how should CIG go about adding value to what we are doing in the game right now? I think one of the most obvious answers outside of simply making the game perform well is creating more in depth missions that aren't nearly so repetitive and have room to grow, as well as providing just a little bit more value for the actual rewards. Like we said before with the other example, if you could get, faction based weapons, armors, skins, any items that can be themed towards that faction, I think that is a pretty basic reward, but it is something other than money that a player can work towards. And I do generally think that even though it's not a replacement for what we will get with 1.0, I think it could hold off players this year, giving them just a little bit more incentive to work towards something. Now, looking back at the example we talked about previously, if we had more missions that had just a few variables, like possible enemy ships parked out front, the game could feel fresher for longer. Creating missions that challenge you as a player to consider your options and plan an approach is a lot more enjoyable than the model we have now. Simple missions like the ones we have are not bad at all. They would be very helpful for beginner players to introduce them into different game types. But there needs to be more room to grow for challenging and dynamic missions, giving you more incentive to get some of those early missions done and work towards some of those more difficult missions that'll take more planning, more time, maybe emphasize some teamwork aspects, maybe not require it, but emphasize, hey, it might be smarter to take a friend with you because this is going to be a little bit more of a challenging mission. And at the end, offering you a better reward, something other than just money. Yes, it might come with a nice paycheck, which of course is a very nice incentive for a lot of players, but if it gave you something simple like as we talked about, an armor set that you can only get for that specific faction that you work for, I think that could be a really awesome reward that would bring a player to find more value behind what they're actually doing. Now, this is where we also have to talk about the narrative content approach CIG is pushing now. Whilst these missions have been enjoyable for the most part, they have yet to actually show any narrative storytelling within them. It is as if I have to imagine what is going on simply because the game does not portray it at all through the gameplay. I think over time, this will change as CIG creates more of this content, but even simple things like a few basic voice lines for characters or actually catching these factions in the act of taking over a base would provide a lot more than what we have now. I don't think CIG is unaware of the lack of narrative in these missions, as they very obviously know how to portray it in their marketing. I just simply think that maybe the mission team hasn't been given the resources to create a genuine narrative experience. This is pure speculation, but my hope is that as we continue on with the development of this game, CIG starts pushing these experiences out with not only more in depth missions, but actual narrative elements that clearly show the change going on in the world. I still believe that these narrative missions could hold us off until we get more of that 1.0 content that they want to push out. We know they're going to be pushing this narrative content all year, which is good. But I also hope, like I said before, we get some more depthful missions that can increase in difficulty over time, incentivizing different things, as well as giving us rewards that aren't just simply money. By itself, this narrative content that has been rewarding things that aren't just money has given me personally way more incentive to play these events and go along with the narrative. Again, CIG wanting more playability is absolutely a positive change. I just hope that whilst they bring the game to a more playable state, they also make the gameplay more enjoyable and impactful for players. Now, before we wrap this video up a bit, we need to talk about the more sandbox elements of Star Citizen. The verse in Star Citizen is beautifully open world and has tons of systems to create your own gameplay with other players. Whilst I think this is awesome, it has a long ways to go before it feels like the game will actually support this sandbox gameplay. Organizations, which are a massive part of this sandbox element, lack any tools currently to offer gameplay in the actual game. You can still manage to have events with other players in your orgs, but it's much more of a hassle than it should be. I think the closer we get to 1.0, orgs and sandbox gameplay will actually have a bunch more defining experiences for players and groups, Giving orgs the ability to create bases that act as hubs for players is one of the most amazing sandbox elements that we simply don't have yet. I love seeing orgs set up these massive fleet battles currently and doing all these events, but I think there is much more potential to adding purpose behind these types of encounters. Surprise attacking an org in the future to steal their resources creates awesome sandbox gameplay, whilst offering an incentive so that you have resources for your own org. Maybe even taking out an org's Bengal carrier to cripple their defenses and make them more vulnerable to a space station raid would be an awesome use of these sandbox elements. But we simply don't have anything like that in the game right now. There's still tons of things you can do with the current sandbox, but it doesn't have the needed features and content to make it a more purposeful use of your time. For now, we do the thing we want to do simply because it can be fun. Very similar to the mission talk that we had earlier. Some people do those missions simply because they enjoy the missions and that's it, which I absolutely support. I think this is a great mindset. But at the same time, there should be elements of this sandbox that offer a bit more purpose to players outside of the simple enjoyment of having fun. And that really helps me summarize a lot of what we're talking about here today. The current gameplay across the board in Star Citizen lacks purpose. There is not much depth and value in the missions and rewards we currently have. And the massive sandbox in today's game still lacks the needed support it should have. Even though Star Citizen 1.0 plan has a great outline behind what it wants to offer to players, they need to start slowly implementing parts of that experience into what we have today so players can start to feel value behind what they do. They have made a ton of positive change with some of the narrative content they are pushing, but I still believe we have ways to go before the gameplay in Star Citizen starts to drive more excitement and replayability. To wrap this up a little bit more, I want to actually talk about the disclaimer at the start of this video again. This is not me talking about what 1.0 needs to do for Star Citizen to resolve these issues. As a matter of fact, I think the 1.0 outline resolves almost every single issue we have in this video. The only one it really doesn't resolve by itself is just the gameplay of 1.0. Will the missions have depth? Will they be enjoyable? Will they be fun, engaging gameplay? And we will see that pretty quickly when 1.0 releases. But this video is really hammering on that time until we get to 1.0. That very large space of time where we are supposed to try to enjoy this game. Do we have enough? Will we have enough to work towards? Will there be enough content to create an experience that is worth recommending to someone else? Right now, it's an absolute no. The state of the game by itself is enough to say no. But then, even if we did have a solid game without the bugs and performance issues, yes, there's a decent wow factor with everything we have tech wise, but the actual gameplay just isn't there yet to recommend this game to someone who wants to have a fun experience for a long period of time. I'd say if you want to hop on for a few hours, enjoy the game, take another week off and then do it again, you might find enough gameplay to kind of hold yourself off for a little bit. But if you want to hop on almost every day and spend a couple hours or spend an hour just doing stuff, you're going to run out of gameplay that isn't repetitive very quickly. So that's what I'm hammering down in this video is just finding a way to create more value and enjoyable gameplay in the game we currently have until we get to 1.0, where they clearly have a very solid vision as to what we will be doing and progressing towards in that experience. Outside of that, I really appreciate you listening. I know this is a little bit of a longer video, but there's a decent bit to cover and I wanted to talk about all aspects of this game. I know I still missed a bunch of things, so if you caught one of those, I would love you to leave it in the comments down below. Just have a discussion about the things I didn't really talk about here. I also would love to hear about how you feel about the current gameplay, as well as the future gameplay when it comes to what we're going to have before 1.0 and at 1.0. I would just love to hear your opinions on those. Outside of that, thank you so much for being here and watching. Again, I know it's a longer one. I tried to keep it as short as I could, but I'm a little bit of a yapper. So every now and then I just kind of go on a little tangent of what I'm talking about. If you would like, I do have a community Discord. It does very bare bones right now, but if you do want to hop into that, I would really appreciate that. It's a fun way to communicate with each other. Outside of that, though, again, thank you so much for being here. I got a ton of stuff I'm working on just to get some content out and give you guys something to listen to, and just trying to put out a conversation that is, not negative, but provides just more critical thought behind what we can do as a community and what CIG can do to better this project that we clearly all love and just want to succeed. Again, Thank you for so much for being here. I have my Star Citizen playlist if you'd like to listen to some more Star Citizen videos by me. Outside of that, I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next video.